Okay, welcome everybody to the 19th celebration of finishing our round of Tehillim. Just like the men get to have a siyum every time they finish a Gemara, which takes considerably more time, we are looking for a reason to celebrate as well because we finished the whole book of Tehillim as a group. The purpose of our group is to acknowledge all of the blessings Hashem gives us in our life, because so many people concentrate in life on what they don't have. And if someone just takes a minute to acknowledge what they do have in their life can be much fuller. And by saying even one chapter of Tehillim a day, it's like a spiritual vitamin. And it kind of gives you a boost to connect with Hashem in a special way. And a lot of people are really enjoying the group. And it also gives people an excuse to make it through the entire book of Tehillim instead of just saying certain chapters. So today we have a special Rabbi David Twersky, who I know from Seattle. Please mute yourself if you're there making noise. And Rabbi Twersky will be giving us a lecture about Tehillim. Okay, let me see if I can mute more people. Here we go. There we go. Okay, very good. Rabbi Twersky, please take it away for us.
Okay. When Mrs. Young asked me to zoom in with you and share a few thoughts on Tehillim, I could not say no. I've known Lori since the time I was young and she was not. Now she is young and I am not. But she has always inspired me from the time she and her siblings came down from Alaska to the lower 48 to participate in Bigger Cholim's Camp Noah when I was a counselor. It must have been sometime in the late 1960s. And it may well have been Lori's first exposure to some of the more famous verses in Tehillim. I remember the counselors had to keep correcting Lori and her siblings when we were singing the pasuk from Tehillim chapter 100, verse 2. Zev Eisenstein, of blessed memory, the camp director, was singing Ivdu, 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 Es Hashem B'Simcha, and the contingent from Alaska was harmonizing Igloo, 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 Igloo. But even back then, I was inspired by Lori's inquisitiveness, her sincerity, and her desire to grow and to learn and to share her enthusiasm for learning with others. This has been a characteristic trait of hers from the entire period of time I've known her, and as I've said, that's a very long time. So I want to thank Mrs. Young for inviting me to speak at the Siyum number 19 of her Daily Gratitude Tehillim group. I know this special group connects women who come across many time zones and many countries, many backgrounds and personal situations. But they are women who have in common the fact that they have chosen this vehicle to bound themselves with the Almighty and to express their gratitude to Him via the inspired writings of King David in the hope of achieving further blessings for themselves, their families, their communities, and Klal Yisrael. May all these aspirations come to fruition. I do not claim to be a Tehillim scholar or any type of other scholar for that matter, but I do have some observations as a relatively new Oleh and as a relative Tehillim reciter that may interest the members of this group, and I am taking this opportunity to share them with you in a brief talk I have entitled Thoughts of David, about Psalms of David, King David, from the city of David, Jerusalem. My thesis is that in the past century, we have not only witnessed a miraculous rebirth of the land of Israel and the return of a large percentage of people of Israel to their land, but we are simultaneously witnessing a rebirth of the book of Tehillim and its relationship to the people of Israel as well. And to some extent, these two rebirths go hand in hand. Of the many inspiring scenes of Israeli life that I have noticed since making Aliyah about 6 years ago is the ubiquitous presence of Tehillim recitation in this country. One finds men and women, boys and girls, not all Haredi, not even all outwardly religious in their dress or appearance, who carry Tehillim booklets in their purse or pocket or knapsack or as an app on their smartphone, and who use them. Of course, one sees Tehillim at the Kotel, thousands of books of Psalms in hundreds of editions. Virtually all of them contain the original Hebrew, but many have translations into English or French or Russian or Spanish or Portuguese, and the list of languages goes on. At the Kotel, one finds men and women and children of all ages reciting these ancient prayers in front of the holy stones of the wall at all hours of the day and night. Shabbos afternoon, as the sun begins to set, there are dozens of little Hasidic boys seated around their teacher at the back of the Kotel Plaza. The teacher, wearing a shtreimel and kapota, recites with them chapter after chapter of Tehillim, verse by verse. And these pre-bar mitzvah boys, probably some as young as 6 or 7 years old, chant the Tehillim with him ba'al peh, completely from memory. There are special Oneg Shabbos Tehillim groups for boys and girls throughout the country, some on Friday evenings and some on Shabbos afternoon, where similar scenes are repeated. Now, it is certainly exciting to observe Tehillim recitation at the Kotel and in Oneg Shabbos youth groups, but it is not totally unexpected. However, what is particularly thrilling to see in this country is how many people are reading Tehillim while waiting in line at the post office, while standing at a bus stop, while riding the light rail, while sitting in a barber shop, or while in the waiting room of the medical office or dental office waiting their turn. Indeed, it is quite normal to see doctors or dentists provide bookshelves with Tehillim in their waiting rooms, alongside the mandatory fish aquariums and pictorial magazines, so that their patients will be able to spend their time productively while waiting for their appointment, and perhaps so that they can come into their appointment having achieved at least some degree of relief and serenity from the anxiety that typically accompanies a medical or dental visit. I've seen shopkeepers, even grocery checkout people, keep small Tehillim by the cash registers to recite their daily quota of psalms between customers. It is truly inspiring. In the US, there's an expression, it's as American as baseball and apple pie. The equivalent expression in this country, I believe, is it's as Israeli as reciting Tehillim and falafel. Earlier this month, I attended the graduation of my Israeli daughter-in-law, who received a degree in social work from Bar-Ilan University. The program was pretty much what you might expect at a graduation from an American university. There was a reception for graduates and their families. There were speeches from administrators, faculty, and students. There was musical entertainment, and the program concluded with the singing of the national anthem. Of course, it was the Hatikva rather than the Star-Spangled Banner. But what made the program stand out, the aha moment, yes, we are now in Israel, was the fact that the program began with one of the graduates stepping up to the podium and reading verses from chapter 119 in the book of Psalms to give the graduation ceremony a spiritual context. Of course, many popular Israeli songs that one hears on radio and concerts and at all kinds of simchas consist of verses from Tehillim. Certainly this is true with Hasidic music and chazanut, but verses of Tehillim even find their way into the repertoire of secular performers and more nationalistic performances. I have given the matter some thought, and I would like to share with you some suggestions as to why I think the words of King David resonate so strongly, of course, with the Jewish people in general, and that has been true throughout our history, but in particular with the Jewish people in the modern day state of Israel. The first reason, I believe, is the very significant fact that for the first time since perhaps the end of the First Temple period, Hebrew is now the language of the masses in Eretz Yisrael. With the Assyrian and later the Babylonian conquests, Aramaic became the language of record for large portions of the Eastern Mediterranean, including the Jews in Israel. The latter books of Tanakh, Daniel and Ezra, are written primarily in Aramaic. By the early years of the Second Temple, it became necessary to publicly translate verse by verse the public Torah readings from Hebrew to Aramaic. The Aramaic Targum, literally translation, became a mandatory accompaniment to the Kriyat Torah because the masses could not understand the reading of the Hebrew Bible. Of course, the Jerusalem Talmud and later the Babylonian Talmud are written in Aramaic because Hebrew was not the spoken language of the masses. So while we often speak of the miracle of the restoration of Jewish sovereignty over the land of Israel and Jerusalem for the first time in 1900 years, perhaps almost as great a miracle is the restoration of Hebrew as the spoken language of the masses of the people of the land of Israel for the first time in maybe 2,500 years. Now, I grant you, from a purist point of view, modern Hebrew has been corrupted by foreign words that greatly compound the difficulty of a new Oleh in trying to read a Hebrew newspaper or listen to the news reports on the radio. And that one of the biggest put-downs an Ulpan teacher can tell an American day school graduate who just made Aliyah is not to say to him, you sound like you just got off the boat, but to tell him or her, you sound like you just stepped out of the Chumash. That having been said, the fact remains that the average Israeli school child can read and understand a parak from Tanakh without much difficulty and can appreciate the meaning and beauty, emotion and eloquence of a chapter of Tehillim without having to resort to any type of Targum or translation. This makes a tremendous difference in being able to establish an emotional connection with verses and chapters of Psalms and ultimately with their author, and beyond that, ultimately with the Almighty. So I think the first reason Tehillim resonates so powerfully with the Jews of Israel in modern times is because of the unprecedented, since biblical times, ability to understand at least the superficial meaning of the verses in their native tongue. Second, life in modern Israel invokes a roller coaster of emotions, just as do the various chapters of Tehillim. They invoke pride and hope and confidence in seeing God's providence and protection in their lives, and they invoke feelings of vulnerability, insecurity, awareness of the great threats to our existence that surround us on a daily basis. They invoke associations with our past, and they invoke aspirations for our future. In short, the mood swings, the mix of swagger and sweat that typify the contemporary Israeli personality and mentality mirrors exactly the emotional swings and the range of expressions King David verbalized in his divinely inspired writings. The words of Tehillim express anxieties and frustrations. They also express feelings of awe and amazement at the wonders of God that the author beholds. Those are exactly the feelings of the national psyche of the Jewish people in the land of Israel today. Third, I believe there is, at least for some and perhaps for most, an unspoken pride of ownership factor in laying claim to Jewish sovereignty, as it were, of this universally respected volume of religious poetry and song. Just as there is a nationalist religious pride and sense of mission in insisting that the land of Israel is ours, and a sense of urgency to settle it and build it up under Jewish auspices, so to speak, so too I feel there's a sense of mission in identifying the Psalms of David as a national treasury and legacy of the nation whose flag bears the Star of David. And finally, there is a special affinity between the Jewish people and the land of Israel regarding any matter of holiness that simply does not exist in the exile. There's a famous Ramban in his Chumash commentary on Parshas Achrei Mos. We are used to thinking that when it comes to agricultural laws such as observance of the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, and giving of gifts from our crops to the priests and the Levites, the Trumas and Maasros, there Eretz Yisrael has special holiness, but as far as the other mitzvahs are concerned, the Torah's commandments apply everywhere. And that is true. However, Ramban writes that fundamentally, all mitzvos were meant to be kept only in the land of Israel. The Jews were merely warned not to abandon the practice of mitzvos, such as putting on tefillin, placing mezuzahs on their doorpost, sitting in sukkahs, etc., when they went into exile, so that they would not forget how to do them, and it would not be a totally new experience when they returned from exile to the land of Israel, as was prophesied by the prophets. Ramban cites an analogy from the Medrash, quote, "This can be compared to a master who got angry with his wife and sent her back to her father's home. He said to her, 'Even in your father's house, I want you to wear makeup and put on jewelry, so that when I send for you to come back to me, these matters will not be unfamiliar to you.' So too, God sent the Jewish people into exile, but he warned them to keep up their practice of mitzvos there, so that when they come back to his palace, the mitzvos would not be strange practices to them." And what is true about mitzvos is certainly true regarding the recitation of Tehillim. Fundamentally, they were meant to be recited in the context of divine service and Jewish prayer on holy soil in the holy temple. I make this statement based on internal evidence in the book of Psalms itself, from Psalm 137. One doesn't have to wait 6 months doing a chapter a day to come across Psalm 137. Open any siddur or bencher, and you will find it right before benching, right before the grace before meals, after meals, just parallel to one of the most famous Psalms, number 126, which represents the pinnacle of connection between the book of Tehillim and the modern day association with the return to Zion, that opens with the words, "Shir hamalos b'shuv Hashem eshivas Tzion, hayinu kecholmin." When God will return the captivity of Zion, will we be like dreamers. I want to read the note that appears in page 182 of the Art Scroll Siddur, just above the parallel presentations of Psalm 126 and 137. Quoting, "It is customary to recite Al Naros Bavel, Psalm 137, in memory of the temple's destruction before Birkat HaMazon on weekdays. On the Sabbath and festivals, and on such occasions as the meals celebrating a marriage, bris, or pidyon haben, it is improper to intrude upon the joy with memories of tragedy. At such times, Shir Hamalos, Psalm 126, which describes the joy of redemption, is recited instead." In normative practice today, I don't know how customary it is to recite Al Naros Bavel before weekday Birkas HaMazon. I don't think it is. But the concept is brought down in rabbinic literature, and it behooves us to understand the contrast between these two psalms. Al Naros Bavel speaks of the plight of the Jews being driven from Eretz Yisrael to exile by their Babylonian captors. They were mercilessly driven out of their homeland and not given a chance to rest on the road until they crossed the border and reached the rivers of Babylon. At that point, their oppressors allowed them to eat and mocked them, telling them, "Sing for us from Zion's song, Shiru lanu mishir Tzion." The Jews were horrified at the idea that this sacred music, which was part of the divine service for the temple, should now be played on foreign soil. Eich noshir es shir Hashem al admas nechor. It is following this verse, questioning the very possibility of singing the songs of God on foreign land, that we have the famous verse, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yamini tidbak leshoni lechiki im lo eskarechi im lo ale es Yerushalayim al rosh simchasi. The Jews pledged at that moment, as they were being led into exile, that in the exile there could never be an experience of happiness. They could never again raise their voices in joyous song if they would not, at least momentarily, mentally raise up the memory of Jerusalem al rosh simchasi, above their foremost joy. And if Psalm 137 captures the feeling of hesitancy and even embarrassment to be singing the songs of God on foreign land, it is the parallel Psalm 126, anticipating the time when Hashem will return the captivity of Zion, where the Jewish people anxiously expressed their longing for the future time when Ozi Mole Schokpinu Ulshonenu Rina. Then once again, our mouth will be filled with laughter and our tongues with glad song. We are today seeing the beginning of this time, and it is evidenced, among other things, by a noticeable increase in the singing of verses of Tehillim, which I will speak about more in a minute. So to summarize what I've said so far, I think that there are at least 4 primary reasons that Tehillim recitation is such a meaningful part of the modern Israeli scene. First, the language factor. People use the language of Tehillim in their everyday conversation for the first time in 2,500 years. Second, the correlation between the roller coaster of emotions evidenced in Tehillim and those evidenced in the lives of the modern day Israeli. Third, the Jewish pride of ownership factor, re-emphasizing our rightful ownership of this universally respected volume of biblical literature. And fourth, the Ech Noshir Eshir Hashem al Admas Nechor factor. Tehillim was meant to be recited primarily in the land of Israel, in the presence of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, which has never left the Temple Mount. Har Habayis Biodenu, the Temple Mount is now again in our hands, and we are thrilled to be reciting the Psalms of David in its presence once again. But there's one other factor that I believe is most noteworthy about the rejuvenation, with the emphasis on Jew, the rejuvenation of the book of Tehillim in our time, throughout the world, but particularly in the land of Israel. And that is the unfolding restoration of the connection between the words of Tehillim and Jewish music in our time. The chapters of Tehillim were originally recited in the temple to music. There's a Talmudic dispute whether Ikar Shira B'peh or Ikar Shira B'kli Shir, whether primarily music of song in the temple was vocal or instrumental. But regardless, temple music was an integral part of the divine service. The primary job of a large section of the tribe of the Levites was to serve as part of a large temple choir. Anyone who has gone through Tehillim, even once, is cognizant of the fact that the overwhelming number of chapters in the book are introduced with some kind of title or introductory phrase, which somehow categorizes the nature of the psalm. 57 of the 150 chapters of Tehillim are introduced with the word mizmor. Another 50 are introduced with the word la manatseach. The word maskil introduces 13 psalms. The word michtam introduces 6. Famously, a number of psalms begin and end with the words hallelujah. We find the word tefillah at the start of 5 psalms. There's much mystery and uncertainty regarding the categorization of the psalms based on these specific introductory words. But many scholars suggest that these terms are related to the musical accompaniment of the psalm when they were sung in the temple, or to some kind of musical direction given to the conductor of the Levite choir and those playing musical instruments as part of the temple service. We have lost the tradition of temple music, and we really have no idea of the nuances of difference between the various categories of psalms, certainly not in terms of their appropriate musical rendition. However, while the original notes and melodies of the various chapters of Tehillim have been lost, we are witnessing a dramatic development that started a century ago and has picked up speed in recent decades and years, in which the connection between the words of David and Psalms and Jewish music has been reestablished and is growing from strength to strength. In this connection, I must mention the name of an individual who I believe played a major role in this phenomenon. I visited for the first time a couple of weeks ago the Har HaMenuchot Kever gravesite of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. Carlebach, according to his tombstone, was a direct descendant of King David. I've seen a lot of grave sites of famous rabbis in my life, especially since moving to Israel. But Carlebach's tombstone is the only kever I have ever seen that has built onto it an adjacent bookcase full of volumes of Tehillim, in a wide variety of languages, with the request that visitors recite chapters from Psalms in the presence of the tomb of one of the great disseminators of the words and spirit of Tehillim in the history of the Jewish people. Over his long career, he must have put dozens, if not hundreds, of psukim from Tehillim to music, and has indelibly associated in the global Jewish psyche certain verses from Psalms with his trademark nigunim. Seeing this bookcase of Tehillim next to this famous grave on Jerusalem's largest cemetery, I thought to myself, it is appropriate for the man and it is appropriate for the place. He blazed a new trail in Jewish music in the 20th century and beyond, and in the course of that revolution, seems to have found the key to unlocking the spirituality of dozens, if not hundreds, of verses from King David's Psalms, which are once again sung throughout the world, but particularly they're sung Ba'or Yehuda u'Bechutzos Yerushalayim, in the cities of Judea and in the streets of Jerusalem. In the last few minutes, I just want to briefly review the modern history of the reunification of Tehillim with Jewish music, which we take for granted today, but which really has seen some dramatic changes in the past century. Karl Bach was certainly not the first person in modern Jewish history to put the words of Tehillim to music. There have been for many generations cantorial compositions which created musical renditions of the various psalms which are part of the Shabbos and Yom Tov liturgy. Beginning in the early part of the 20th century, following the invention of the phonograph by Thomas Edison in 1877, and certainly following the availability of mass-produced record players in the 1940s, famous chazonim began to record their compositions on records, and the wide dissemination of tunes from various psalms put to music began. One of the most famous chazonim of all time was cantor Yossele Rosenblatt, who was at his prime during the early years of the newly created record industry. His biggest hit was a rendition of the Shir HaMalos recited before benching, that to this day is one of the most popular tunes for this song, certainly in the Ashkenazi community. Shir HaMalos B'shuv Adoshem. This tune was actually composed by another famous chazan, cantor Pinchas Minkowski, but Rosenblatt was the one who made it famous because he was the first to record it, and it is often called Rosenblatt Shir HaMalos. It was so popular and so congruent with the emotions and enthusiasm of the religious Zionist movement in the first half of the 20th century that when Israel became a state in 1948 and was looking for a suitable national anthem, Rosenblatt's Shir HaMalot was proposed as a serious candidate. Ironically, although the Minkowski-Rosenblatt Shir HaMalos did not become the Israeli national anthem, the tune of the Hatikva soon became a popular way of singing Shir HaMalos. Shir HaMalos b'shuv Adoshem, Eshiva Sion Ayinu kecholmim. Another famous chazan of the same era who produced many cantorial records was Moshe Kusevitsky. He has a famous musical rendition of Tehillim chapter 121, which begins Shir LaMalos Eso Einai El Hashem. Virtually all the recordings of these famous early to mid 20th century chazonim recorded excerpts from the synagogue liturgy, and they were usually musical renditions of complete chapters of Tehillim. Where Karl Bach broke new ground was in two areas. First, he did not record chazonos, which were beautiful to listen to, but were provided as one-man shows by famous cantors with beautiful voices and great talent. Karl Bach provided his own trademark nigunim, which were meant not to be one-man shows, but were songs meant to be sung by the masses. Most were quite catchy, quite easy to learn, and could lift the listeners spiritually, not by the power of the vocal cords that sang them, but by the special blend of words and melody. And secondly, where Karl Bach broke new ground is that he in general did not try to compose music for entire chapters of Tehillim, as did the Chazonim. He zeroed in on key verses, put them to his own blend of music, and emblazoned those verses of Tehillim on the neshamos of a new generation of Jews who were not familiar with the synagogue traditions in Europe and often were not very familiar with much about anything about Judaism. For example, although you can still go onto the internet and hear Moshe Kusevitsky's powerful rendition of Psalm 121, Carlebach basically blew that version out of the water when he introduced the first song from his very first album, which is entirely focused on just the first two verses of that song. I can still remember when Rabbi Carlebach introduced his Eso Einai Elohorim in Seattle at a concert at the Old Bikur Cholim on 17th and Yesler, January 1st, 1959. In later years, he began singing it in both Hebrew and English to audiences far less traditional than that which heard him in Bikur Cholim in 1959. Carlebach proved to be a trendsetter, and since his time, the floodgates of putting verses of Tehillim to music have burst wide open. The media has changed from records to tapes to 8-track to CDs to Walkman to iPods and smartphones, and the names of the performers have greatly expanded. But the man whose body lies next to the bookcase of Tehillim in Har Menuchot Seminary in Jerusalem deserves a lot of credit for starting this revolution of resetting the book of Psalms to music in our time. So what we observe today, particularly in the land of Israel, is a fascination with Tehillim, both its recitation in the traditional form, as well as its musical rendition, which harkens back to an ancient tradition, but which has taken on a life and direction of its own in modern times. I want to conclude by congratulating again this group upon completing cycle 19 and beginning cycle 20 of their daily Tehillim recitation. May you continue to function and grow not only through cycle number 20, but ad mea ve'esrim, through cycle 120. Thanks for asking me.
David, that was amazing, amazing. I learned so much, and I'd like to open up the floor to people to see if they have any questions. But I just must thank you that I knew that there was a lot of Psalms put to Tehillim, but I didn't know so much of the historical background, and that was really exciting to hear, and to hear about Rabbi Carlebach's kever and the Tehillim there. It was just amazing. And I have to tell you, I had always wondered about the Shir Hamalos tune, how, you know, everybody all over the world has the same tune. And you gave me the answers. So it was really
go to the internet, you'll find that there's a German Jewish custom, the Yekis, that each Yontif, they'd sing a different tune to Shir Hamalos based on the nigunim in the shul on that occasion. And you can actually click and listen to about 20 different versions of Shir Hamalos. But I don't know how many Yekis keep that custom, but it was interesting when researching, I came across that.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I am tried to unmute everybody now, and if anybody has a question or wants to thank Rabbi Twersky.
Or if anybody has a question they want to email me and don't want to say in front of everybody, you can send out my email.
Okay, because for some reason, not everyone's letting me unmute them. So anybody want to say anything? Don't be shy.
Ruth from Switzerland. Yes, of course. I'm familiar with this. Every Yontiv, it's a different nigun.
Oh,
and I go to the ERG in Zurich, in the Freigut-Strasse. That's with Rabbi Levi. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful.
Very nice.
So thank you very much for the clarification.
Very good. Anybody else?
Someone typed in a question.
You're typing in a question?
Someone typed in one.
Okay. Dina's going to type us a question.
No, someone else did.
Oh, someone else did. Okay. Do you see that, Rabbi Twersky?
Oh, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to look. Do I click on chat?
Was there a halachic reason that Chazans did full chapters?
Say that again?
Was there a halachic reason that Chazans Tehillim did full chapters.
Well, yeah, to the extent that they were reciting the chapters as part of the service, they had the option of either coming up with a musical rendition of the whole thing or just saying it, mumble part of it, and then give a nice tune for the verses they wanted to put the music. But typically on a yontif or Shabbos Musaf, Chazanim would like to show off, and so they tackle a whole psalm. It wasn't the longer psalms; it was the shorter psalms, usually like you find in Hallel. The various Shir Hamalos are said, not just the Shir Hamalos from benching, but there's actually Shir Hamalos 120 to 134 are the Shir Hamalos in the psalms, and they're said on different occasions in the synagogue.
I have a question on that. I like to say number 121, and I've been looking for a song that actually I could sing the whole thing. Do you know of a song for either 121 or actually 100 also? Both of those.
Well, like I say, 121, you have the chazonas, but it's not the kind of thing that a catchy person would be able to, it could be, like I say, there are a lot of modern entertainers that are putting new Tehillim to music all the time. And I'm not that a bookie on all the modern music, but you can Google it in Hebrew and you might find something. Or Facebook or something.
Most of the songs these days seems to be just like 1 or 2 or 3 lines.
That's the trend. That's the trend, yeah.
Yeah, but what I do find interesting is when we say our 1 Tehillim a day, that we come across the words that we recognize.
Yeah, right.
Like, oh wow, this is where that performer got that music.
Right, exactly.
You're absolutely right. That there's just so many songs from Tehillim. It's wonderful. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Then with that, we're going to end this and stop the recording, but I would like to invite people to, I'd like to make a little infomercial for the Tehillim group. So I'm going to send out, I don't know quite how to do that. I'm going to start a Tehillim, I don't know how to start it. Okay, I'm going to send everybody an opportunity to log in again, and we're going to just say what we like about the Tehillim group, and if anybody wants to join me for that. Actually, I think I just better make it next week so I can send it out properly to everybody. Okay. Anyway, we're just going to end it and thank Rabbi Twersky.
Thank you, Rabbi.
There we go. Lots of thank yous. It was
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you. It was so interesting, and I think it's, and what was also very inspiring was to hear how so much Tehillim is all over Israel, from the little boys at the hotel to the grocery stores. It was very good. It was just, It makes us, our little part of Tehillim, just part of the big revolution of Tehillim all over the world. So thank you, Rabbi Twersky. Thank you for volunteering. That's really good.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.